Hi, this is Rachel Paxton, and today I'm going to show you how to pressure can fish. Today you're going to learn how to can fresh fish. I'll lead you through the process step by step. I'll give you the recipe and the canning supply list that you can download and print out for future reference. You'll find those with your course materials, and you'll also gain the confidence you need to try more pressure canning recipes on your own. My name is Rachel Paxton, and I'm a freelance writer and mom of 5 children, ages 28 to 6. This is me and my husband, Dave. We've been married for 20 years. Here's 3 of our children. Zachary and Christian are twins, and they are 11. Trenton is 6, and we also have 28 and 26-year-old daughters. I've been canning for more than 20 years, and I'm also the owner of the website, creativehomemaking.com. For this recipe, you'll need about 2 to 3 medium fish per pint jar. I canned trout. If you're canning bigger fish like salmon, of course, you might need more than 1 jar for 1 fish, so it just depends on how big your fish are. You also are going to need pickling or canning salt, which you can get in the grocery store next to the regular salt. You're also going to need a pressure canner, a jar lifter, and pint or half pint canning jars. It's not suggested that you can fish in quart jars, so you can choose pint or half pint jars. This is what a dial gauge pressure canner looks like. There are 2 different kinds of pressure canners, a dial gauge and a weighted gauge canner. I use a dial gauge. This is pretty common, so this is what I'm going to show you how to use. If you don't have one of these, you can order one on Amazon for about $75. And if you don't have any canning equipment yet, I recommend you get a pressure canner, because you can boiling water can or pressure can in a pressure canner. But if you buy a less expensive boiling water canner, you cannot pressure can in it. You can only use it for boiling water canning. So pressure canner is definitely a better deal, and it's made out of stainless steel, so you'll be able to use it for a long time. You're also going to need a jar lifter. First, you want to sterilize your jars, rings, and lids in the dishwasher. You can reuse your jars and rings, but you can't reuse the lids. You need to throw them away after you use them and get new ones for next time. Usually, when you're canning, you want to have your jars hot when you put your food in them before processing them, but in this recipe is an exception. So after you sterilize your jars, you want to just let them sit and cool off. You're going to put the food in the jars when the jars are cool. If you don't have a dishwasher, you can sterilize them in boiling water in a pan on the stove, and then you just take them out and let them cool off. You want to put about 3 inches of water in your pressure canner. Usually you would be starting to get your water boiling, but in this case we're not going to. You never want to put cold jars in hot water or hot jars in cold water, because the difference in temperature can make your jars crack or break. So for this recipe, you're going to put the jars in cool water and then heat it all up. But I usually turn mine on low. If it's warm, it's okay. You just don't want it to be hot. Okay, when you're canning fish, you don't have to cut up the fish and or clean the fish right before you can it, but you do need to clean the fish within 2 hours of catching it, or they start to go bad. So we cleaned our fish right after we catch them, and then I put them in Ziploc bags in the refrigerator, and you can store them in the refrigerator for a couple of days before you can them. And these are trout that I'm canning today. You also need to have some canning or pickling salt. This is what you use when you make dill pickles. It's really inexpensive. I'm not sure what the difference is between this salt and regular salt, but they're not the same, so don't use regular salt. You definitely want canning salt. So get some canning salt and put a cup of it in a big pot of water and let it dissolve. Then you want to put the fish, your cut up and clean, or not cut up, but your clean fish, in the water and let it soak for an hour. And this will be a brine for your fish. There's my fish soaking. Then I took the fish out of the pot and chopped them into pieces that would fit into my pint canning jars. You can remove the bones or leave them in. If your fish are small, you can just leave the fish or the bones in the fish. I just left them in. If your fish are really large and it has big bones, you're welcome to take the bones out. And you want to make sure that your fish is small enough that it leaves an inch headspace at the top of your jar, and that is the amount of space between the top of the fish and the top of the jar. If your jars are too full, you won't, when you're processing it in the canner, there won't be, and if there's not enough space, your food will expand, and if it expands too much and there's not enough room left in your jars for it to expand, your jar can explode. So you don't want that to happen. So in this recipe, you need 1 inch headspace, and I'm pretty sure the recipe said to have the skin facing the jar also. I don't know if that matters or not, but just pack your fish in there. I think I put about 3 medium-sized fish in 1 jar. And the difference between this recipe and most other recipes, I think this is the only recipe I've seen where you don't put any liquid in the jar at all. You just put the fish in. When you pressure can it, the liquid will come out of the fish, and you actually will have liquid in your jar when you take it back out of the canner. But you do not put any water or anything in with your fish, just the fish. After you get the fish in the jar, you want to dampen a towel with vinegar and wipe the rinse of the jars so your jars will get a good seal. The vinegar removes any oils. Water is not very good at doing that, so vinegar will get that off to make sure your jars seal. Place your clean lids and rings on the jars, just finger tight. Place your jars in your canner, and you're going to process them at 10 pounds of pressure for 100 minutes for both pints or half pints. This is what a pressure canner looks like. And first of all, if you live over 1,000 feet in elevation, you're going to have to process your fish for longer than the 100 minutes. And actually, I think you have to increase the pressure. But there is a altitude adjustment chart in your course material, so reference that and check for your altitude and see what the difference in time and pressure is. You want to make sure you get that right, or else your food will not be processed at a high enough temperature for long enough. So if you're below 1,000 feet, you're fine with the instructions I just gave you. And if you need to check that chart, make sure you do that. And here's what the pressure canner looks like. When you put the lid on, the first thing you're going to want to do is take the pressure regulator off of the vent pipe and turn the heat on the stove up to high. And just to go back to this picture for a second, you notice that the pan is not full of water like it is with a boiling water canner. In a boiling water canner, you usually have the water an inch above your jars, but in a pressure canner, you only start out with 3 inches of water, and then when you put the jars in, looks like the water is almost on top of the jars here, but that isn't always the case. Sometimes the water only comes up halfway. And that's okay with pressure canning. Your jars do not need to be covered with water when you're pressure canning. So after you get the lid on and you take the pressure regulator off, you're going to turn your stove on to high and wait for it to start boiling. When it starts boiling, the steam will start coming out of the vent pipe. After you see steam coming out of the vent pipe for 10 minutes, you can put the pressure regulator on, and at that time the pressure will start building up in your pan. For this recipe, it needs to be 10 pounds of pressure. When the dial gets to 10 pounds, you want to turn the temperature on the stove way down. On my stove, it's between 2 and 3. If you don't turn the temperature down, the pressure will keep building. It won't stop, and it'll get too hot, and you don't want that to happen. So turn the temperature down to low. You do not want the temperature or the pressure to drop below 10, or you'll have to start your timer over again. So you just want the temperature to be at a temperature where your pressure will stay right at 10 pounds. So when you get that achieved, you want to set your timer for 100 minutes. And after the 100 minutes is up, you just want to turn the stove off and let your pan sit there until the vent pipe goes down. The vent pipe or not the vent pipe, the lid lock, when the lid lock goes down. The lid lock went up when the pressure built in your pan, and that's how you know there's pressure in your pan. So when the lid lock goes down, that's how you know the pressure is out of your pan. So when the lid lock goes down, it is, if you wait a minute or two, it is safe to open your pan. And then you can take your jars out, lift them out with a jar lifter, and set them on the towel on the kitchen counter to cool. This is what the fish looked like when it came back out of the canner. It's all cooked and ready to eat. When the jars seal, you should hear a pinging noise. A lot of times the jars will seal in the canner, but sometimes they don't. It can take 10 to 15 minutes for them to seal. If a jar does not seal, it can be refrigerated and eaten within the next week or two. And you can store your sealed jars in a dark, cool area for 1 to 2 years or more. It's a good idea to let the jars sit on the counter for at least 12 hours before you move them. You'll notice the water will still be boiling in the jars when you take them out of the pressure canner. So let them sit for at least 12 hours to cool and settle. And that's it. This was the first time I'd ever canned fish, and I thought it was really fun. You might wonder why you would want to can fish rather than freeze it, but we have a lot of fish in our freezer, and you only have limited freezer space, and so it's great when you can find other things to do with food besides put it in the freezer. And also, if our freezer ever went out or the electricity ever went out, then we won't have to worry about this fish getting spoiled because we'll have it in jars and all ready to go. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and I hope to see you again soon.